of Lent. You are going to join us this Sunday for Palm Sunday, but before that, you have some uh, thoughts on a recent article. So give us your thoughts.
Do because I think it's both a fascinating centrist statement about where dialogue must now begin to rebuild, reconnect, and it's an important introduction segue to your invitation to my presence on Palm Sunday and how conscious clergy are when they share the public in a dialogue that's relational. What we've built in the past almost 5 months is between like-minded interpreters of Scripture. When you bring me to your pulpit and you invite me to share in preaching, especially Protestants who invite non-Christians to preach, what is that about? I'm in awe of the invitation, and I think this essay begins to re-stimulate our purpose as dialogue partners. Where do we begin? This came in a new Sapir journal, Friends and Foes. And this is religious Christians. Not sure I like that word.
Yeah, so the title is Religious Christians. The subtitle is Imagine America and an America in which we invested in the biblical roots of our cultural heritage. It is by Robert Nicholson. I think he's from, I can't remember what organization. I know that name. The Philos Project, maybe?
Yes. So why don't I like that name? Religious, because it overstimulates some people with a whole value glossary that will make us both gag simultaneously. So, look, it is an important new way to talk about post October 7th and the nature of what the two of us have tried to do. I think others have too. Let's go back to what we share. And what we share, Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, Christian scripture, we share texts. So before we get to political opinions, personal punditry, our daily venting and annoyances, what do we share? And our institutions even give us a lectionary, a weekly Torah reading. So we can stop. I think his idea of sharing scripture is a way of regaining perspective. That's why I sent it to you.
Yeah, this is good. So the first few sentences here, he writes, the groundswell of support for Hamas in cities across Europe and North America since October 7th is a wake-up call for anyone who cares about the future of the West. The problem is not just an emerging alliance between Islamists and progressives who seek the downfall of America and Israel. It's the inability of Christians and Jews to muster a serious response. The solution is not more pro-Israel advocacy or better politics. It is a conscious return to our joint heritage in Jerusalem.
And how do we do that? There's a front page New York Times article today about Columbia University's inability for their task force to even define anti-Semitism. Okay, contemporary discourse is gone. Okay, it's gone. And this is a way to not use contemporary discourse. This is a way to say, you use your translation, I'll use my translation, but yet let's use a text we share. It slows down dialogue when you put scripture as a way of carefully, critically rereading something we think we both know.
Do you have a favorite translation of the Tanakh?
I use the Jewish Study Bible from Oxford
Okay.
edition too.
Yeah. Same.
I do it because the commentary and essays are worth the volume.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, I I think when you put a text in front of people, and we found this on Monday nights, when you put a text in front of people, you help them regain how to think, stop, rethink, and then talk.
Hmm. Hmm. I uh, I have an acquaintance who does reconciliation work in the West Bank. And his father started it in the 70s. I think his father went to Fuller Seminary. And he said early on what his father discovered was to get Palestinians and Jews to dialogue, that he had to take them out to the wilderness and camp, so that they were on a neutral site, in order to get them to stop fighting and listen to each other. And I think a text can serve that same kind of purpose, that it takes us out of our spots and puts us on the same field.
And I would take the word neutral out. That word
Mm-hmm.
is
Yeah.
loaded now, and try and use the word common.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because common might permit differences. Neutral, I'm already going to begin to argue neutral to what?
So help people understand a little bit, because in this article here, Robert Nicholson is talking about um, kind of the context of Protestant and evangelical affinity for Israel, and how particular that is to their understandings of the faith.
I always, when I teach anti-Semitism in America, I make sure people understand the Puritans were Protestants.
Mm-hmm.
This is a Protestant Christian country. Now, that also meant when they chose to separate religion and state, those who were separating it understood what religion they didn't want to impose upon the civil. Okay. Why is that important? Because the Bible, thank you, Martin Luther, is the foundational aspect of being Protestant Christians, as opposed to Catholicism, where you have a different institutional hierarchy, much less autonomy, and tradition, theology as the bulwark. So, Jews and Protestants have a way of looking at each other through a scriptural lens that has always started conversations, sometimes ended them quickly. When I taught at Valparaiso University, a Lutheran university, the dean of the chapel screamed when I gave a sermon in the chapel, blasphemer. Okay. However, when Christians that are Protestants want to engage Jews, they go to a moment of U.S. history where crossing the Sea of Reeds is a common understanding of historical redemption.
Mm-hmm.
That was proposed to be the first seal of the United States of America.
I didn't know that.
Yep. So, what does Israel mean to Protestant Christians? And there is a long history of what is tragically now called Christian Zionism. Maybe the two of us can figure out a better term for that, in which the relationship with the idea of a Jewish homeland, not even the reality of a Jewish homeland, has always been a way of philo-Semitism, of engaging Jews in a way of understanding I can't help you with anti-Semitism, but I can help you over here. Okay. There is, long before Zionism moved beyond the mandate and then post World War II, the reality, there was a relationship that biblical Christians understood about Israel, the land, as necessarily connected to the people. There are some Christians who would like to figure out a way to disconnect the land from the people. That allows them to ideologically refer to Zionism as one of the colonialist settler sins. But I'm here to help. And God, Torah, and Israel. I think I'll write a book about that. God, Torah, and Israel. Israel means land and people. Go to the promise of God to Abram, then Abraham. They're interconnected. You cannot separate them.
I mean, I'm a reasonably intelligent clergy person, and I don't think I appreciated the importance of the land until I spoke with Leo Leibowitz after October 7th. That was a big epiphany for me.
There is no way to simply refer to a Jewish community without the promise, the realization, and the burden of its sustainability.
Yeah, because, I think Christian theology and biblical scholarship does a good job of holding out the irrevocability of the promise. I will be your God and you will be my people. But we don't then like, okay, where is that going to happen? It does.
Let's go back to Lech Lecha Me'artzecha, chapter 12 of Genesis. God says to Abram, go forth from the land of your fathers to the land I will send you. He doesn't say, hey, why don't you come out and study theology with me and we'll swap a few ideas. No. The covenantal engagement begins with a promise: become an immigrant, a nomadic clan on your way. I think that's why immigration, migrants, refugees has historically been and continues to this day an unanswerable domain. Whose responsibility are these people?
But there is, I mentioned this before we started recording, but I think the challenge of Judaism to Christianity is Judaism refuses to be spiritualized. The God of Israel is not asking people to invite them into their hearts. It's about land and practice. And
no, there's just no way to make a pristine, encapsulated thought system. It doesn't happen. Never happens biblically. There are attempts rabbinically in the Middle Ages. Doesn't work. You got to do in order to be a Jew.
I think it. Oh gosh, it's Stanley Hauerwas likes to joke that any God who doesn't tell you what to do with your pots and your pans and your genitals isn't a God worth worshiping.
I'm not gonna. Yes, that's absolutely true. What this essay wants us to engage at a time of intellectual chaos is to put back a text that we truly share it, into the discipline of engagement.
So one of the things Robert Nicholson writes here, and I think this is an important point. He says, There is no greater sign of America's cultural unraveling than the resurgence of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel sentiment across the country. This revival is driven by two sources. First, by people of faith who nonetheless reject Jewish and Christian revelation as a suitable intellectual foundation. Second, and more dangerously, by a rising camp of religious nuns who hitch their wagons to a variety of progressive causes that require the dismantling of biblical morality and the institutions upholding it. Like I was rereading Bonhoeffer earlier this week, and it's, I just think it's people don't appreciate that when we have these periods in history of the unraveling of in Germany of Christendom, and it turns into something else, that anti-Semitism gets worse. And so that it's not. Yeah, I just think this dynamic between the decline in practicing people of faith and the increase in something like anti-Semitism are correlated in a way that I don't know that people pay attention to.
Let me use the word, because I agree with those two sentences very much, certainty. If you're looking for a descriptive trigger of our times, it's certainty. And when so many people are so certain about so many different elements, you are in big trouble. Let's think back to the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, the terrible, painful engagement over civil rights. Jews and Christians shared texts.
Mm-hmm.
There was a reason that Martin Luther King was a Bible-trained preacher. He was not a political agent. He took his religion into politics, just as the prophets. And there was Abraham Joshua Heschel, lots of other rabbis too. And what was clear about them is they were certain about nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They really had the Kierkegaardian fear and trembling.
Mm-hmm.
DEI, the painful, ugly certainty of anti-Zionism in its full-blown rage of anti-Semitism. No, they're all certain about it. Mm-hmm. They don't even take a breath to explain the root causisms of October 7th. So what are we to do to break out of this cycle? Well, I would like to hope that if there were 100 podcasts between Christians and Jews, a pastor and a rabbi, that would begin to seed a different kind of humility. We're both pretty strong egos, but when it comes to the actual reality of what we're facing, I don't think either of us, brings the arrogance of certainty. Do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
What might draw us together is the horror and certainty of, no, that's not the way to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what this essay is, again, offering us an opportunity to back away and regain some perspective.
Yeah, I mean, so he begins, he says, so he asks, what will this revolution look like? And he says, it must begin with a basic recognition of the Hebraic heritage itself, the cultural foundation that Jews and Christians share. And what is that heritage but the story of revelation at the core of the Hebrew Bible? The story of an encounter between mankind and the God of Israel, a supernatural being beyond space and time who cares about his creation and acts in history through a chosen people to reconcile heaven and earth. reframing, restating, reinforcing that tradition as the key storyline undergirding our disparate religious systems is the starting point for any Hebraic Renaissance. And then he goes on to talk about how this kind of dialogue and revisiting these shared texts, how important like the stories of the Bible, how important they are to forge a civilizational identity.
And I could imagine that in this way. The two of us could train public school teachers to better understand why no one who is true to what Nicholson is describing would claim the Ten Commandments should be up in every classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those who bring the seal of certainty about the biblical narratives that have claimed the narrative. They are the ones, no, I'm going to put this up. This is the way we all should live. Excuse me, which version? And they don't know what the question even means. Exodus, Deuteronomy, translation. We could take the simplest of texts to be able to begin to rebuild critical reading skills.
And it seems to me the other side of that too is politicians and advocates and whatnot who have talked about Judeo-Christian values may have been doing so for a particular purpose, but they weren't necessarily wrong. That, Christendom may have been problematic on a number of levels, and yet there is a latent foundation of the commandments that undergirds the culture, and that once Christendom disappears, we're unmoored from those commandments.
Maybe it would offer some engaged in our government an awareness that what they are quoting is not the Christendom they think they're quoting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a whole lot of taking the Lord's name in vain going on right now.
Oh, the situational disinformation that misrepresents what Christendom is. Taking the Lord's name in vain. I understand that prohibition to be using God's name in a promise which you know you won't keep. Do we know a few legislators who constantly make promises using the holiness of God as verbal collateral when they actually know? Yeah, okay.
So, did your kids go to public school or?
They did. We looked at Jewish day schools. They hadn't yet become communal, eclectic, pluralistic as they are now. They were highly denominational.
Okay.
In the way that I don't even like the word denomination. In Brazil, most Jewish kids go to day schools because they are superior schools.
Okay.
They're private schools. And the Jewish school has become the single greatest source of identity formation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I once asked a superior why United Methodists don't have our own schools, because I was the idea that we can form people to be Christians with them giving us an hour a couple of times a month is ridiculous, right? It's like we should have them every day, all day long, and he said it was because of the mainline Protestant church's role in the civil rights movement and desegregation, that building our own private schools would be seen as a backward step.
We can go back and look at Dewey and the early elements of 1880 to 1930 and what integrating that number of ethnic religious differences in the public realm mean. Yeah, I think it antedates civil rights.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a single answer to how the identity we're both looking for has the most consistent formation in a 21st century pluralist. I think it was important for my kids to be Jews in public schools when they were growing up, and their need to engage being a minority. What does it mean when there are only two of you?
Yeah.
Now, there are some urban areas where the public schools provide a actual critical mass of Jews, and they shut down on Jewish holy days because the school, students, teachers, staff. I don't know what that means for the rest of the 21st century. I worry what the university experience of the last 5 months is leading to.
Mm-hmm.
I think at some point we're going to have to sit and talk about the fear of being afraid, the fear in anticipation of being afraid. Jews now publicly talk about the conscious consideration of hiding. I think that's going to change a lot of things, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to slowly come back to a place on October 5th and 6th and recalibrate where we were, because we can't start on October 8th. What happened between the 7th and 8th is, I can't begin to measure it. Let me give you an example. In Israel, the current Israeli parliament has rushed headlong into the stupidity of determining that the Hebrew month of Tishrei, the 24th day of Tishrei, will be the Israeli day of memorial. What? Excuse me? Well, we're not going to use October 7th. We use the Hebrew calendar. What? Excuse me? We're not through with what happened. How there are people who've not yet had funerals. I think we're learning along the way how much difference October 7th has made. What this essay is asking us to do, as prompted by October 7th, is go back to something we had left and reconsider it in a new perspective. So I would say October 7th has created and shattered previous understandings. October 8th and following requires that we ask, how do we restart something with a perspective for which we have no framing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, Hebraic culture, he uses words and idioms that require definitions, contextualization. I don't think anybody reading this essay can read it without creating a new glossary. And that's fine. I'm a stickler about, excuse me, what did you mean? Can we stop and go back and understand? Do we both understand Hebraic culture? While I was a professor at St. Cloud State University, I was asked to come and consult with the school district. Somalis, a significant population of Somalis, live in St. Cloud, Minnesota. You have to understand, states bid for the right to incorporate a large critical mass of refugees. They get government support. St. Cloud, like Minneapolis, has a large group of Somalis, East African tribal Muslims. There was an argument in the little school district of a overly white community. They won't eat the lunch. Okay, can we begin with Muslim dietary restrictions? They're in America now. Okay, let's go back and try and understand. You invited them. You asked them to come. 3 hours later, I had gotten them to admit they could serve good, healthy vegetarian meals if they did not want to provide halal. One of the cafeteria workers stood up and screamed at the school board and me, "Don't you take away pork! It's one of my American rights." Okay. And I went back to campus and mumbled to myself for several hours.
But that's a good example because antagonism and fear operate not at an intellectual level, but at the level of difference.
And we need to take time to say, "Excuse me, what do you mean?"
Mm-hmm.
We can't just keep texting and TikToking. We need to stop and look at each. "Excuse me, I don't think I understood you. What do you mean?" Why won't they?
And that example that you gave too, because probably that lunch lady identifies as a Christian in some way, right? And it's a good example of how so much of Christianity has been reduced to just spirituality, like a mental assent, and so the idea of this embodied practice-based religion seems foreign.
And they're black, they're Muslim. What are they doing here? And no contemporary contextualization. You invited them. Remember hospitality? Abraham invites the three guests into his tent. I think Nicholson would agree, if he does nothing else in this essay but make us stop, rethink, do we know what we each mean? Maybe I have to go back and explain what I thought you said, and you have to stop and say, "No, I mean this."
Mm-hmm.
When we say Judeo-Christian values, okay, we have to break that down these days.
Yeah, but related to that, one of the things I appreciated in this article and just talking with you is I exist in a mainline Christian world where I am exhausted from the reduction of Christianity to the golden rule. And yet, I think in that exhaustion, I have failed to appreciate the fact that the commandments are revelation. And we make a profound mistake to just assume everyone naturally kind of understands these these practices.
And the ambiguity in the text itself
Mm-hmm.
makes us stop and be much more careful. The golden rule comes from Leviticus 19:18. Please read the whole verse, not just the B part of the verse. Do not commit revenge and bear a grudge. Semicolon. Love your neighbor as yourself. Anybody can have a t-shirt with the B part of the verse.
Yeah, I always like
Yeah.
to frequently, usually in social settings where people find out what I do for a living, and they'll want to tell me something like, "Well, I don't really believe in God, but I'm basically a nice person. That's good enough, right?" And I'm like, "Well, if you're not obeying the first commandment, I'm not sure he's so much interested in the others."
So here's a moment where we can engage right like Nicholson. The first commandment we read differently in our text.
I knew you were going to follow up with that. Yeah. So yeah, flesh this out for people.
Is a statement, not a commandment. The first utterance, that's why we call them the 10 utterances. I am the Lord your God who took you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. Period.
Which anyone who's watched the first episode of West Wing will know. But
the second and third commandment are prohibitions about idolatry. The first is an utterance describing the source and authorship of the 10 utterances. And it doesn't say, believe in me. Mm-hmm. It simply says, I am. I don't care whether you believe it. In the 50 years I've been a rabbi, lots of people come and say, I am an atheist. Oh, good. You have not made a statement about God, but you have made an interesting statement about you. So that would be an interesting place just to start. How would Christians like to reframe the first of the 10 utterances? Could you go back to an original understanding of the Hebrew text and not accept the need to push belief into a statement of declaration?
Yeah, that's good, because Christians bring to the text a creedal understanding of the faith, right?
Yep. And it often changes. What thrills me on Monday night, what just fills my head with delight, is watching you and Josh and Kelly and Todd and Joanna. Wow, how did you do that with the text? Where did you see that?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
And I think what Nicholson wants, I don't want to join him with the Bible Museum. What he wants is what we just had. A moment in which, excuse me, can we go back and look at that verse more carefully?
Mm-hmm.
If we can plant those seeds of behavior, if we can get Jews and Christians, not ministers and rabbis, to begin to say to each other, I need to know what you mean by Israel.
Yeah, I mean, you meant
land, not government.
Yeah, you mentioned the Bible Museum, and so I went there a year or so ago, and one of the problems I had with it is that it treats the Bible as detached from a particular people. And so it's just this, like it is a cultural artifact, yes, but it can't just be that. And that's the problem with posting the commandments in classrooms and courthouses, because stripped of a particular people embodying them, like they have no claim.
it is I won't go to it because I think I will spend too much time being angry. It was created with a certainty that, and not a humility of the text it is trying to provide.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. So, and that's different from, like the Native American Museum that's part of the Smithsonian has or at least the last time I was there, had an exhibit showing the ways in which the Bible was used in the subjugation of westward expansion. Mm-hmm. And so that was an interesting way to deal with the history. Yeah.
I think it would be interesting to send the Nicholson essay out to seminarians. What do you imagine your role as interpreters of this text? To rabbinic seminarians, Christian seminarians, and then bring them into a common room. Okay, we're going to give you a week to work together to tell us the practical application of these ideas.
I think if you gave it, I think among clergy and seminarians in the mainline world, we are so driven to not be John Hagee and, evangelical Republicans who support Israel for dispensationalist reasons. I think we're so determined not to be that we just don't engage our relationship to Judaism.
That's interesting. I think the fact that we share Tony and that we knew to trust each other because of how much we trust Tony helped us not spend a lot of time bobbing and weaving. we just took the risk of being open. Mm-hmm. We make some mistakes, but we didn't need to be afraid of being afraid. It will be interesting to see if Nicholson's essay could reframe and stimulate some new institutional dialogues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this was before October 7th, but, I've experienced, I don't know how many clergy almost apologetic for visiting Israel, and bending over backwards to explain, like, well, we're going to have a Palestinian guide, and we're going to, so it's our desire to not be what we perceive as the other side of the Christian family tree, I think determines a lot of our practice and identity.
And to stop and say, October 7th was created by a radical eliminationist Islamic terrorist organization. Are we all understanding how this started? Mm-hmm. That this is not from within the wild diversity of the Palestinian people, which does include Christians of many different branches. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's not about Arab people. It's a unique eliminationist, radical Muslim terrorist organization. I didn't see a bunch of people worried about how Muslims would take our rejection of Al-Qaeda or ISIS.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's hard for largely secular people in the West to take seriously the zeal of a eliminationist ideology? Like we just don't understand?
I'm going to turn your question into a broader question. Is it difficult for us to acknowledge what extremism means in America today?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we always waiting for the easiest way to back off of what a January 6th is?
Mm-hmm.
I am so horrified at the obscenity of referring to October 6th participants as hostages. That's obscene.
Mm-hmm.
That's obscene in reference to Americans being held hostage in Russia.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's I mean, that's part of what I'm asking is because that kind of obscenity it's also not serious. Right? So it's a failure to engage ac- actual extremism.
Yes, it is a default mechanism, which tragically, in part, has become a seal of Christian nationalism, which is itself an extremism that is become politically, what's the right word? Ignorable?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it's secularism that makes it difficult for us to take radical Islamic terror seriously. I think it's part of the zeitgeist.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm incredulous about it, Jason. I don't understand how a trap door does not open and just swallow him into the earth as it did Korah.
How long, O Lord?
How is this possible that we continue to hear someone intentionally abuse truth? And there are no lightning bolts, no trapdoors. And is it that God is constantly whispering, hey, this is up to you. I've given you all the tools you need. If you don't get this, this is on you. Don't look at me.
Yeah. I mean, well, yeah. There's a lot of Christians who want to like present Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, as though a demand for the truth is not a correlative to that.
I don't know. I there's more to worry about than Nicholson can write in this essay, but it's a good way to begin to talk about how can a Jew and a Christian reconnect in a new context.
Hmm. What just a random question? Do you know much about the relationship between Christians and Jews in Ukraine, for example?
That's a wonderful question. Which Jews, which Christians? The remnant of Ukrainian Jews who uh, have attempted to recreate some post-Soviet modern Jewish identity. There's a little progressive community there. The worldwide Chabad ultra-Orthodox Jewish community in the Ukraine, both exist. They're not the same kind of Jew. Which kind of Christian? The Orthodox Church Christian, linking itself to, quote, the Russian Orthodox, mainline Western imported. I don't know. I think European Jewish Christian dialogue is highly dependent on locale and leadership.
Okay. Hmm.
And that's true also in Israel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have very different dialogues in Jerusalem, where institutional hierarchy dominates over and against Tel Aviv, Haifa, Haifa with a large critical mass of Israeli Arabs and the Baha'i Church. So I think we're going to be caught in highly circumstantial, situational, defined, contextual Jewish Christian relations for a while.
Hmm.
We're not going to be able to look and point to what Heschel and the church did, what Heschel and King did, what I was able to accomplish in Minneapolis with a group of clergy. This is going to have to restart, and we're going to have to re-examine, reintroduce, reconstruct. What are our expectations of the dialogue? Where are we going to go? Very honestly, is it time that I say, Jason, find your local rabbi? That is more important to your community than what we're creating.
Hmm.
So I think this is very good. This is a real moment. This is the purpose of the Nicholson essay.
Mm-hmm.
Develop a conversation that then says, okay, I'm going to invest this amount of time, this amount of resources. I'm going to do this for myself alone. And after I am reconfigured, I use that term because Holy Week is coming up, then I will invite my congregation. The goal is not for you and the rabbi of the synagogue in Alexandria, but ultimately the two congregations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm told by the then rector of the Basilica of St. Mary in Minneapolis, my dialogue partner then, Father Michael O'Connell, that he was told by members of his church, seeing you and the rabbi on our pulpit, seeing you embrace, did more than all the sermons you both gave.
I can't remember where I told you before. Years ago, before I got sick, I was trying to plan a joint trip to Israel with Bethel and my church, and trying to, oh my gosh, it was trying to get Jews and Christians to agree on what places they would visit. There was an interesting lens into where people are at and how to get them all on the same page.
And I did that with Father Michael, and we took 84 people, 2 buses. We preached together on the Mount of Beatitudes. We each led a different part of the tour down the Stations of the Cross. So it can be done. I preferred interfaith tours. I found leading Jews exhausting. It was just too much jingoism for me. I could not handle it. And maybe that's a goal for a year from now. What does it mean to have Christians share the burden of Jews' fear?
Yeah. 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 I mean, that, because just the way, the idea of the way that like going to Israel is presented to Christians is to it's more than just the places that Jesus walked, right? Like the land, even for Christians, it should have other meanings to you, other than just that particular narrative.
And Michael and I constructed this. We will take you where we, quote, as Catholics, understand the sacred is. You take us where the sacred is. Yad Vashem, Mount Herzl, not just the wall, which is bitterly politicized and weaponized now. And Israel now may be just too volatile. Maybe we Christians and Jews need to find other places to visit. Maybe there has to be an interfaith tour from Alexandria to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And then the Museum of the Bible. And then the Native American. There have to be ways to get Jews and Christians to share the pluralism of their identities.
That's good. Well, Joseph, thank you.
You're welcome. And I will see you Sunday morning.
Yeah.